Get ready.
Welcome, everyone, to a brand new season of Gullcast, a production of Endicott Esports and the School of Sports Science. I'm your host, Brendan Hall, Esports Coordinator here at Endicott. And with these episodes, we're taking you through this fascinating industry with some of the most captivating people leading conversations. As always, you can catch up on all our past episodes on Spotify and YouTube. Just search through our catalog for past episodes and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's at Endicott Esports. And if you're really liking these episodes, we'd love a 5-star review. So for those of you who had a chance to watch the 2025 Fortnite Globals back in September over in Lyon, France, you saw one of the best crowds maybe ever for an esports event, at least as far as I can recall. The energy was on full tilt from the moment that first battle bus sounded the horn until the very last moment when Gentle Mates took home the title. And the reason for that energy, there's a lot of reasons, but in my opinion, you can trace it all back to this next guest, one of the most revered voices in Fortnite and one of the most electric casters going in esports, period. It's an absolute pleasure to kick off this new season of Gullcast with this next guest. It was such a fun time chatting with this guy about his storytelling craft. You're going to love it too. Please welcome, without further ado, Leven2K. Enjoy. Leven, thank you so much for being here today. Just for those of us who are unfamiliar, you could just quickly introduce yourself.
Yeah, no problem. My name is Leven2K. I am a professional Fortnite commentator and analyst. I've been doing this for the past 5-6 years. I've been playing Fortnite since the beginning, but in terms of professionally working with Epic Games and doing broadcast work for the past 5 years now.
Yeah. You most recently were at Fortnite Globals in Lyon, France, and for those who've never experienced a live esports event, how can you possibly characterize it? How would you describe that?
It was truly electric. Being in the LDLC arena in Lyon, you know, it's my job is to describe things professionally, and even I struggled to get across just how amazing it was. You could just feel the passion in the room and the excitement in the room from everybody.
Yeah. How would you, when you're commentating a match like in Fortnite, for instance, right? The action really starts picking up, I feel like, in the second half of those maps. Tell me about your process for keeping things going. How do you tell a story when the action is still kind of in its low phase?
I'm really glad you asked me this question, because this is one thing I care a lot about, and I don't think enough people understand this. And whenever I'm giving people advice on commentary, the first thing I tell them is you have to understand and master different narratives. There's so many different narratives you can tell throughout a game, regardless of what it is you're commentating, right? You can tell the analytical narrative, right? You can tell the historical narrative and what do we need to know about these players' past to understand what's happening here in the present. You know, you can tell a very humorous narrative. You know, that's one thing that me and one of my old commentary partners, Oyelade, we used to love. We used to just, you know, try and make things fun. And so once you understand a bunch of the different narratives you can tap into, it then becomes understanding, okay, when's it most appropriate to use certain narratives, right? If things are really intense in the second half of the games, like you highlighted, we ain't telling all that funny stuff, right? It then becomes about, okay, analytically, what's happening here, right? And so, you know, it's very much about understanding what to use and when. In a Fortnite game, things sort of, you know, slowly ramp up. You get a lot of action at the start of a game because, you know, off spawn, people are fighting each other for different spots. And then things sort of gradually pick up. And so it's about, you know, almost, you know, using the downtime in the game to give viewers context and let them know what they need to know before things start to pick up and start to ramp up.
Yeah, I sometimes equate this. I know you're across the pond, so I don't know how informed you all are about baseball, but I sometimes equate this to in baseball, right? Where nothing happens, and then something, right? But
yeah.
The biggest challenge for a baseball broadcaster, you know, aside from having to do it 162 times a year, is the ability to tell a story when there's just not a lot of action going on. And I don't know, like maybe there's some overlap there too, to a lesser extent with like watching English Premier League football, where like you're waiting a lot of times for that run to set up for things to get going. And so I'm curious, like, where you draw your inspirations from when it comes to storytelling.
So many places, man. I think the beauty of storytelling is that it is everywhere, right? I think no matter what form of media you're involved in, there is an element of storytelling that plays a part in creating that. And so I try to take inspirations from so many different places. I think directly when I first started out, a lot of it was looking at commentary in the sports I liked, right? So I'm a big football fan, I'm a big basketball fan, NBA fan. So, I sort of would look at some of my favorite commentators from there. I was always a big fan of Gary Neville as a commentator in football. I love Mike Breen in basketball, right? And again, so it's like, when you start to get in that mind frame of understanding what makes a good story, you then pick up the things these other people are doing, and then, okay, so how can I bring elements of that into telling stories in Fortnite? Because it's hard where it's not direct, right? Obviously, those things aren't battle royales, so you can't take it one for one, but you might be able to get a really get inspiration from a really cool hype moment in the fourth quarter of a playoff game that you're like, ooh, in the Fortnite endgame, there's a similar pace in there. Cool, I can, maybe not still a bang, but I can have my own thing there. So that's where I get my inspiration from.
What about in the end game, right? You've got a lot of people there, and the action is just you blink and you literally could miss 6 things. How do you keep up with the pace as things get towards end game?
You don't. No, of course you do. I mean, no, you do. I mean, you eventually you have to if you want to stay in the job. I mean, obviously a lot of it is having that familiarity with what's going on. And so, when you watch so many games of Fortnite, you almost can start to see how things are going to go because maybe you've seen a certain zone before. So you understand how things are going to play out. And so based off of that knowledge, in my job, a lot of the time, I'm the, sort of more analytical commentator, right? And so I'm looking at things and I'm going, okay, I've seen this before. I understand this team in this position is probably going to have to play like that. And so if we see that play out, okay, I know that's, going to work out for them, or maybe that's not going to work out. Maybe they're doing something different. I think a lot of it as well is having trust with, the other biggest part of a production in that moment, which is the observers, right? And so trusting that what they're showing me is the most important things. Because sometimes, I might know that there's a team still in the game and I'm thinking, okay, what are these guys doing? But I have to trust that if the observers are showing me this team right now on our screens, okay, this is the narrative to follow, and how do we tell the story of what these guys are doing best? So having that trust between the two different teams is important.
Absolutely. As far as the prep for an event like Fortnite Globals, when does it start, and how many hours go into that prep work?
The prep for this year's Globals started when last year's Globals ended.
Really?
Because again, in a world where we're constantly telling these stories, you have to be following what's going on, right? And so one thing about me is I like to sort of find ways to tell these big sort of macro narratives around certain players and their trajectories throughout the year. And so from the moment FNCS last year was done, and we're looking at, who did well, who didn't do well, the fallout of that, right? And so now I'm analyzing the fallout of that, and I'm taking that into next year where I'm like, okay, look, this guy had a super crazy high last year. Throughout the year, it's been a bit rocky, right? We know he's a player that struggles, in moments, in big moments where the lights are the brightest. Now a lot of people are sleeping on him. How do we look at, so you are constantly following. The preparation is so extensive. It becomes a full-time thing, right? I might only be on the broadcast on the weekend, right, doing the Saturday and Sunday Globals, but the work has been all throughout the year in terms of just gathering that information, gathering that context. And it's a lot of fun, right? If you enjoy it, right? Because it means I get to follow the game and follow what these players are doing all throughout the year. But it starts early. If you miss all that stuff out at the start of the year, right? If you don't have the context of how well Peterbot or how Peterbot missed out on the first, major in NA at the start of the year. Telling the story of the struggles he's facing in globals is less impactful because I don't have that thing to reference it back to, right? And so you have to have that context of everything that's happened throughout the year.
I love this answer because I think we often think, well, okay, we have the production meeting Monday, and then Tuesday we do this, and then Wednesday we do that. But what you're saying is it really is, it's a surround sound experience, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it's not even just the player knowledge and things, right? All throughout the year, you're sort of coming up with ideas, and you're practicing things in terms of different segments you might be doing on the broadcast of like, how do we tell this story? How do we frame these teams and these narratives? And oftentimes, the best ones, the ones that we felt landed the best, are the ones we then take and say, okay, in globals, when we're having those production meetings, it's like, hey, it was really good when we did this segment where we talked about these three teams in this way, using these graphics and using, this information. Now we can do that at the global championships.
I sometimes equate this to being like law school. In other words, you learn so many different things in law school, and then when you go out to practice, you don't end up actually practicing half of it, but you just have this huge leviathan like depth of knowledge about things. Do you feel the same way about a broadcast where you just acquire so much institutional knowledge just ready at the go? And in an events case, I mean, how often do things go wrong where there's lag time or a game crashes and you got to think on the fly, right? I mean, is that a fair comparison, you think?
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Look, you look at a Fortnite lobby, a typical Fortnite tournament, there's 100 players in that lobby. If I'm doing my job well, I should be prepared to talk about all 100 of those players. I don't know how it actually works out in terms of the maths, but you probably end up only ever talking about 33 out of those 100 players, right, on a day, because you just don't see certain things, right? And so you have so much knowledge stored in there, but as you rightfully highlighted, in those moments where you have time to fill, because there always will be one. Right. When you're doing a live production, there's always going to be a moment. This year in Lyon, it was my first year starting the show, being at the top of the show, and that's typically where you will have the delays at the start of the event. At the start of the broadcast, there might be something. And so I said to our producers, I was like, hey guys, this year I need a smooth year. No delays, no nothing. Like, I don't want to be stood out there for an hour filling. But even though I said that, of course we're ready for it. And there was a slight delay, and I didn't even notice it. It was only after the fact where, we're sort of talking, we're like, oh my goodness, well, how come the game didn't start? Actually, we were there for quite some time, because you're just able to work off that stored knowledge you have. And so, yeah, there is so much. It's comparable to law. I do have friends who do law, so I'm never going to seriously compare talking about Fortnite to, the rigorous, demands of studying law. But I like that comparison for sure.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about globals here too, because it was a unique role for you where we're all those guys with a rotating guys on the desk, right? And then like one point they get you up in the crowd, you're getting the crowd fired up. That was probably my favorite moment is you screaming, "Are you ready?" and 60,000 French people just flipping out. When I talk about in previous models of class, I've had guest speakers kind of almost compared to like a rock concert. So we had, I'm speaking in Boston. We've had several huge esports events at a concert hall near Fenway Park, and there's definitely some crossover. I'm curious. So kind of two things. How do you handle just the variety in an event like that, and then vibing with the crowd? Like, how do you get a read for what is the right tone to hit when you're doing like crowd work like that?
Yeah, it's two great questions. I think in terms of the first front of, switching about, a lot of that just comes from, I've taken up multiple different roles in my time in Fortnite. And so I'm just always ready to jump into something. I like switching about just because, I like to do a bit of everything. I know some people prefer to do just specific roles and like to be set in their ways, but I sort of stay ready just through being excited, about doing the different things. I jumped on the cast for one game, I'm doing analysis, and you might be back on the telestration board, or, whether you're out in the crowd doing crowd work. So I'm excited to do all those things. And so you know, when a chance comes to do it, it's like, great, I get a chance to do a little bit of this now. So that for me, it just comes from excitement. Then when it comes to actually handling a crowd and understanding a crowd, a lot of it, I think, is about building trust. Ultimately, a lot of the people who are watching are people who, or a lot of people who are there are people who have watched the product over the course of the year. And even if they haven't, right, they slowly get to figure you out and learn about you through what they are witnessing in the arena. And so I'm very fortunate that obviously when we're in France, we have a bunch of passionate French fans who are familiar with what I do, and they've seen me do that in previous years. So when they see me sort of step out in the crowd, I was actually there in the crowd before the segment sort of started. I was there in the crowd for probably about 10 or so minutes because we sort of went a bit earlier just to make sure I'd be there and not get mobbed by crazy French fans. And so, you know, I think a lot of people sort of see me there and they're like, okay, it's happening. And so the excitement sort of builds up. You know, it's almost like the hard work's been done for me. Everyone's excited for this massive moment. I just need to now come through and deliver that. And I pride myself in doing that. So, you know, hopefully I've answered your question somewhat adequately. I
No,
think
absolutely.
it's just about understanding the magnitude of the moment and trying to step up to that. You know, the way you talk in front of a room of 10 people is always going to be different to the way you talk in front of a room of 10,000. And so just bringing the energy levels up to match the energy in the room.
I'm going to throw two more questions at you, if you don't mind. So,
no problem, man.
First one, you know, we have I have talked to this class about have some sort of universal truths for storytelling, whether you're in esports, traditional sports, or I don't know, selling tires or something. Like there's some universal truths there. Yeah. What are your universal truths for good storytelling?
My universal truths for good storytelling. I think the biggest one is there has to be transformation, right? People care, you know, about seeing a character get from point A to point B, and so being able to tell that transformation, you see it in all sorts of things, right? You know, if you're watching self-help content on YouTube, the character is yourself and the person's trying to help you solve your problems so that you see a transformation in your life, get from point A to point B. If it's within Fortnite, I'm talking about how, you know, this player came so close, you know, in this previous tournament, and they went from a player who always was getting close to now becoming a player who can win these types of tournaments, right? It's about showing that transformation that they've been through. I think another really big one for me, and it's one thing that I think it's so glaringly obvious that so many people miss, is just establishing why people should care, right? Like, and you know, in my role as a sort of pundit or desk analyst, I think is actually one of the most important things is giving people context to the identity of the people you're about to discuss and helping them to understand why they should care. Because I could sit here and talk all day about the details of the tactics and why they did this thing or why they did that play or why the coach, you know, rotated them in this certain manner. But why should you care about them? Like these people that I'm talking about, why should you care about them? And so always being able to establish why you should care about the subjects, the characters involved is super important to me.
Absolutely. And do you have a particular favorite event you've casted that you're passionate about?
Ooh,
I know.
I mean,
the heavy ones for last. I know, but
oh, that is so difficult. I think for so many different reasons, like I want to say maybe this year's event in Lyon, just, you know, getting in with the crowd. I think obviously I did it last year. I've done it the previous 2 years. So I've gone in the crowd before the last game and done the whole "Are you ready" thing, and people loved it. And so going into this year, it was like, okay, how do we make it feel bigger and better? And being in the crowd with the passionate fans, you know, the fans were the story of the weekend. Everyone's talking nonstop about how amazing the fans were. So being there with them was really fun. And so I'd say, you know, Lyon was a special one for me for sure. Awesome. But it's so hard. I love all of them.
Well, honestly, that was my favorite. So I'm glad you said Lyon. So for students who want to follow your work? What's the best way to keep up with what you do?
At Leven2K on all forms of social media. Whatever platform it is at Leven2K. I'm often talking about sports or Fortnite. And, recently as well, been doing my best to try help people improve their communication skills and sort of do what I do as well. So that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Leven, thank you very much. This is an exceptional conversation. I really appreciate all your time today.
Hey, great questions, man. Thank you very much. Hopefully I can see some of your students on the FNCS stage soon, man.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. As always, you can catch up on all our past episodes on Spotify and YouTube. Just search our catalog for past episodes and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's at Endicott Esports. For now, signing off, this is Brendan Hall saying thanks for listening. See you next time.